Welcome to Pensari Basketball. My name is Robert, and today we are digging into the mailbag. We're talking everything Raptors preseason. Now look, if you are a Toronto Raptor fan, preseason is not going as planned. Alright, the Raptors are 2-2, and we've discovered a lot about this team. We've discovered that Scottie Barnes' entire rookie season was a sham, that Fred VanVleet cannot shoot, that Pascal Siakam cannot guard a corpse, and that Delano Banton might be, I don't know, the next coming of LeBron James. Look, I mean, we're going to dig into the context of preseason. It is, of course, preseason, but that doesn't mean that we just completely ignore everything we're looking at. So let's look at it. Let's take a look at what we've seen so far from the starters, from the bench, from the end of the bench guys, and just rationally evaluate what we're looking at and what we hope to expect going into the final preseason game. If you're new around here, my name is Robert. This is Pensari Basketball. Hit subscribe, hit notifications. Grab your coffee and let's get to it. All right, so look, I am like you. I'm a Raptor fan. I read the comments, I watch the videos, and it seems like Scottie Barnes, the skeptics are out again. It doesn't matter that, he's played worse in these 4 preseason games than he did in his first playoff series. Let's ignore that. And I want to address this group of people. They are very annoying, and they have been there every time he has a 2-week lull. It happened every time last year. Like, he'd come out, he'd average 18, 19 points per game, and then he'd have like a 5-game stretch where it'd be like 10, 12 points per game. And these guys were like, all right, see, we told you, right? And it's like, these people don't even realize that he has proven them wrong so many times to this point, that to continuously harp on this old narrative about doesn't have the offensive skills, doesn't do this, doesn't do that well. It's like these people are stuck in a time loop. And I just want to say that, look, whatever we saw at Florida State, whatever we saw at Montverde, right, we have seen more in the NBA. There's a larger sample size. You can point to last season and say he played more games last season than he played in his senior season plus college combined. That should matter, right? I mean, like, can we stop living in 2018? Can we stop living in this, maybe he might not be a star? Like, come on, man. The Toronto Raptors basically went into last year in rebuild mode. There was no serious attempt to contend. That's why they went into last season with a backup point guard rotation of Delano Banton and Malachi Flynn. You don't go in to a season with that type of rotation if you're expecting to contend or even be remotely competitive. It's Scottie Barnes being so far ahead of the curve that has completely changed the trajectory for this team. It's dictated the re-signing, first of all, the trade for Thaddeus Young, then the re-signing of Thaddeus Young and Chris Boucher, and now the signing of Otto Porter Jr. You do not make these types of roster moves if you're not expecting to be good, and you don't try to be good if your young player, your key centerpiece young player, cannot contend. So look, I think that this entire thing is overblown. He's obviously coming off of an injury the 3 weeks prior to the training camp. We saw this last year. There's a couple of times where his touch around the basket, which by the way was genuinely incredible for most of last season, just sort of disappeared, and it always coincided with an injury, whether it was a hand injury or a knee injury or, tendonitis or the ankle injury, like towards the second half of the playoff series that he played. Like, the first game, he was awesome, right? He was incredible. He was like triple-double first game ever playoffs. Like, how many players can you say that about, right? There's like this group of skeptics out there, and they're very well disguised as supporters. But I tell you, every time there is even something remotely negative to say about him, they are right there with the, listen, everyone's been, talking up a big storm about this guy, and, everyone's got these really high-end expectations. And look, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that if someone is saying that someone is about to be the next Giannis, and you're the one being like, hey, I think you might be over-exaggerating, you're not standing out on a limb here, right? Obviously, I'd say that the most optimistic of Raptor fans have extremely bullish expectations for Scottie Barnes. Even the expectation that he is going to be, an all-star this year, I think is probably, if you had said this 15, 18 months ago, people would have laughed you out of the gym. But I think that when it comes to Scottie's expectation, to just sort of, bookend this discussion once and for all, I trust Scottie. So when I want to know how good this guy's going to be, I just listen to him. It has never steered me wrong at any point. I listened to him give interviews in college about what he was going to go do, and he went out and did it. And I listened to an interview last year about what he wanted to go out and do in his rookie season, and he did it. So if he's telling you that he wants to be, getting all defense votes and he wants to be an all-star, I actually believe that you should probably believe him. You should believe him. He has a better track record of evaluating or projecting his own success than anyone. So I think that he's going to be just fine. Now let's talk about the rest of the preseason and what else we've seen. Now look, the last game, I got to tell you, I like to not react to preseason too much, but that last game was probably the most frustrating television event in my life. It was up there. It was definitely up there. I cannot listen to Savannah Hamilton. It's just throwing it out there. Just zero broadcast skills. Like, I'm not trying to be mean or rude, and, you're going to let me know in the comments below that I'm being an ass, but man, so irritating. I watched it during Summer League, and it's so fake. Everything is fake. So I really hope she gets way better really quickly, because Alvin Williams, man, this guy is like, I wasn't a huge Alvin Williams fan as a player, but to listen to this guy as a commentator, this is painful. You're telling me there isn't somebody better out there? Man, get Jerome Williams. I can't stand Sam Mitchell, but get Sam Mitchell. Like, there's got to be somebody who's better than this guy, because it is incredibly irritating. And to make it all worse, that in that game, I had to watch Fred VanVleet start out the game. Perfect. That's exactly how you want him to play. Scottie running the point, Pascal's running the break, and boom, Fred VanVleet coming off a screen, Fred VanVleet coming off a flare, and boom, he's hitting a shot. And I'm like, oh my God, he's figured it out. This guy, he was talking about moving off the ball, and he's finally doing it. And it lasted like 5 minutes. And I swear to God, the rest of the game, it was like back to old Fred, he's like dribbling the ball up the court. It's like Scottie has the ball, and Fred just kind of looks at him like, you're not going to let me run the point, right? And I got to tell you, man, like, this guy he just doesn't see anything. And it's frustrating enough that he doesn't see the obvious passes, or he doesn't see angles, and he doesn't see mismatches, and he can't generate a mismatch, and he can't force double teams, and he can't really, he had a little floater. I thought that was really encouraging. But again, like, the second half was putrid. It was awful. And it was just, like, I don't even care that he's shooting and missing. I don't care. I just don't want this guy initiating the offense. Now, who else? Honestly, man, I have been very impressed with Christian Koloko and Precious Achiuwa. I think they've both been really good in preseason so far. Let's see, who else? I have been incredibly impressed by Gary Trent Jr. I don't think that's something you were expecting me to say, but I have been. He has been incredibly disciplined, efficient, and, willing passer. He's been really good. OG Anunoby, honestly, a little bit surprising that his balance is still such a problem, and I know that that's one of the questions that's going to come up in the mailbag, so we will tackle that. He hasn't been great. I don't love, like, how he's, sort of picking his spots, and I think some of the fluidity that we saw at the Rico Hines runs, it's really not translating in the NBA level. I'm actually really surprised that he hasn't done more strength and conditioning work to open up his hips and just get himself back on balance. It feels like his body is just always ahead of his legs somehow, and it is just very weird to see that, someone with the type of investment that the Raptors have made in OG Anunoby over the past 5-6 years, that they couldn't have fixed this problem at this point. But look, we have seen good spurts and bad spurts from OG, and I think if he can play 65 to 70 games, it'll be a massive improvement. And, basketball is played on two ends, and I think his defense against Zach LaVine, that was incredible to watch. And I think sometimes you just have to take the good with the bad with OG, and hopefully his shot comes around. He has not shot well from 3 thus far, but look, if he's just a 3-and-D guy for the rest of his career, he's probably one of the top 3-4 3-and-D guys in the NBA. So that's certainly a great value for the contract that he has. Pascal Siakam, honestly, man, look, a lot of you guys are going to take this as hating, but I have not been impressed at all. And I have been so vocally critical of his defense, especially his team defense, his man defense in the playoffs last year. I mean, we did a basketball zone breakdown for this, and it was like every time James Harden was beating his man off the dribble, there was like a help defender that wasn't there, and that help defender was always Pascal. And it's just sometimes I have to look at it and say, am I being biased against this guy? Am I over stressing? Because it's not like he's the only person making mistakes out there. OG Anunoby's making mistakes, granted not many. Scottie Barnes is making mistakes, but subconsciously I'm excusing it because he's a rookie. But what is Pascal Siakam bringing to the table defensively? Because I got to tell you, I've been watching the entire preseason thus far, and yes, it is preseason, and maybe he's not trying. But the way that this guy gets blown by and the habits that he has defensively, it's putrid. And I don't know if you remember, but last year when he came back and the Raptors were flourishing defensively, that for about an 8-game stretch when he came back last year, their defense plummeted to worse than the NBA. And it was all him. And Nick Nurse had to basically intervene and just say, like, hey, you have to at least try on this end of the court. Like, you're not going to be our best defender, but you have to do something. And he was just awful. Like, you have to be so bad to take a top 15 defense and make them the worst defense in the NBA. It's like you're the anti-Rudy Gobert, right? So I just hope that in his quote-unquote quest for being a top 5 player, and by the way, I have seen nothing to date in preseason that suggests that he has leveled up his skill in any way. And look, we saw a lot more last year. I can tell you that towards the end of last year, I was seeing shades of what could be a top 20 player in the NBA, but I have never in my life seen anything from Pascal Siakam which would suggest that he generates the type of advantages physically or tactically that a top 5 player. I mean, I saw this guy get blocked twice by a pretty average defender, right? Going to the rim. I saw him finishing at the rim and finish under the basket and basically get wedged. It wasn't quite a wedge, but it was like, I have never seen Giannis in the last 5 years have a finish like that at the rim. And it's just because Giannis just gets open, right? I have been harping on this for years now in terms of how superstars generate offense. And I got to tell you, it's all about space. And for all of his for all of his spinning and all of his cool, nifty moves, Siakam just doesn't have a lot to go to. It's not that complicated, right? There's always going to be a team that's going to be able to stop him to some extent, right? In the half court. And we've seen it. And I am just tired of pretending that we haven't seen back-to-back playoffs where he has never been the best player, right? The Raptors have been to the playoffs 3 times in the last 5 years with Siakam, right? 4 years. There's a championship run, then it was the bubble, then it was the Tampa season, and then it was last year, right? That's 4 years. So he wasn't, I don't think, anywhere close to the best player or the second best player for them during the championship run, right? That was Kyle Lowry and, Kawhi Leonard, Marc Gasol. Like, there were other players, but sure, you could argue that he was definitely not the best player. And then in the bubble, he definitely wasn't the best player. I think most people would argue that Kyle Lowry and OG Anunoby were the best players, and Pascal Siakam really shrunk in that moment, not his highest point. And last year, right? Like the first 3 games, he was invisible, right? In the playoffs, and the Raptors just completely dug themselves into a hole, and we were like, oh my gosh, like here comes Siakam again, right? Couldn't really get a big advantage on Tobias Harris, couldn't really get past Joel Embiid. And granted, I mean, okay, it's Joel Embiid and it's the Sixers, but man, like this is not the guy who has shown you that he's a superstar. And I just don't see anything to get super excited about in the preseason so far. But granted, it is preseason, so there's that. And, finally, let's talk about Fred VanVleet. I got so excited that he was talking about coming off the ball a little bit more. And I just see a guy who, from what he's saying, right, like when he's questioned about it, he's like, I think he said something along the lines of, I haven't seen it, I'll see it when I believe it, or I'll believe it when I see it, stuff like that. So it seems like there's still a lack of buy-in in terms of him moving off the ball, that he just still doesn't understand why he's being asked to do it. So we will see if that works out, and we will see if we will see if he regrets not getting surgery in the offseason, right? Choosing to rehab that knee instead of getting surgery. And, we shall see. Because, look, if Fred VanVleet cannot shoot at an elite clip and he continues to shoot the same way he shot in the second half of last season, well, this is going to be a very long year for the Toronto Raptors. Finally, let's talk about the end of the bench guys. A lot of people think that Josh Jackson has given the team a lot to think about. Look, I personally think that I don't think that Josh Jackson, Gabe Brown, or frankly anyone in that group has given me a reason to believe that I would move off of Justin Champagnie. I would still go with Justin Champagnie just based on the work that he did last year. I think he was incredible. But yeah, I'll admit Josh Jackson has been a little bit better. But I think context is very important, okay? And I need you to go back, and for everybody who's clamoring over how great this guy is, I need you to ask yourself, the role that he was playing for those lineups where he was playing well, ask yourself, do you ever want to see him doing that against a starting lineup? Do you ever want to see him being your first option? Do you ever want to see Josh Jackson ISO against, do you want to see him ISOing against Kevin Durant and Ben Simmons? Do you want to see that? Because if not, then what you're saying is this guy is playing incredibly well in a role that he cannot fulfill at the NBA level, which is proven year over year. We have seen this many times, and we haven't seen enough of that other stuff, right? Which is like playing as the fifth option, right? So he's thriving in this role that he cannot play for your team against competition, which almost always is the other team's third string lineup. And I'm sorry, I understand that it might seem impressive because you're watching it with your eyes, but I think it's important to say, who is he doing it with and who is he doing it against? So I really don't see that. I am very surprised personally that Juancho Hernangomez is such a permanent part of Nick Nurse's rotation. We'll see if that remains throughout the year. I do think Otto Porter coming back should probably change that, but Otto has not been healthy thus far, so that's a bummer. Okay, so let's get into the questions. The first question comes from James. The question is, what do you think the Raptors starting lineup will be at midseason? Could Precious or Porter crack the starting lineup? Will Gary Trent Jr. end up as a sixth man? Look, I think it'd be very unfortunate that Gary Trent Jr. would be relegated to the bench, partly because I think he's been really good so far. I am surprised as anyone to say that I have had nothing negative to say about him at all during preseason. He's been efficient. He's played within himself. He's even been halfway decent on defense. I think he's been really good. That being said, yes, I think that there's a really good chance that Precious Achiuwa could crack the rotation ahead of him in the starting lineup. I see no reason why that wouldn't be the case. I think it fits the scheme defensively a little bit better. So yeah, I think that'll be the starting lineup. I don't think Otto Porter will be starting, to be honest, but I think he could be closing games. Okay, moving on. The second question comes from Daryl. How do you define raw offense, and is Christian Coloco's offense raw in your opinion, or is he just the victim of his role at Arizona, much like Scottie was at Florida State? That's interesting. Well, I don't really think that Scottie had a limited role at Florida State. I think he just didn't play a hell of a lot of minutes. But that being said, I understand what you're saying. So offensively, I could say that there's two ways to define raw on offense. One way would be skill, and the other way would be understanding, so IQ, right? And I think that skill is a matter of repetition and, just putting in the reps, right? So if you don't know how to shoot because you haven't done the reps to shoot as many times as other people shoot, then, maybe you're a little bit raw in terms of your shooting ability, right? There are other players that just have not played enough games, and for them it's more of a feel thing, right? Like they don't know where to be, they don't know how to peel off of a pin down, they don't know how to seal their guy in the post, they don't know how to do certain things on offense or on defense, and I think that that's a different type of raw. So I think Christian Koloko, I don't think he's raw personally, but I understand why a lot of people think that he's raw. And it's like raw compared to what? Compared to a 22-year-old senior who's been playing, basketball his whole life? Sure, yeah, he's raw compared to that. But I think he has a lot of good instincts on the basketball court. I think he sees the game pretty well. I think he understands the game and picks up the game pretty well. So I don't necessarily think he's raw in terms of his understanding of the game. I think he sort of sees the schemes and picks up on patterns and angles. But if there is a part of his game that's a little bit raw, it might be, okay, well, the post up moves, or the post moves, or the jump shot might be a little bit raw. But again, I think he has a lot of natural talent to offset whatever we'd consider rawness. So yeah, let's see here. Third question comes from Dave Gunn. Who is a player on a different team that you would like the Raptors to target via trade? Maybe a two-parter, a fringe player who has a sneaky good analytics, and then a big name that you think is worth moving core pieces for. So as much as I am a believer in Christian Koloko, I think if you were to get a big on this team who's just way further ahead, but is a similar type of player, but just might be like 3-4 years ahead of where Koloko is right now, I look at guys like Isaiah Hartenstein and Jakob Poeltl as, fringe, good analytics players that I think could be worth moving some stuff. In terms of a really big player that's worth moving some stuff for, I don't see why they would ever move him, but either Brandon Ingram or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I think, really do mesh well with this team and could be incredible fits as shooting guards in that starting lineup. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know how many picks the Raptors would have to move for either one of those guys. It's obvious that the Pelicans and the Thunder value both those guys really well, but I really like those two on this team. John says, any change of heart on Josh Jackson after his first game? No, none. I think I addressed that earlier, but yeah, I wouldn't have him on this team. John asks, who do you think is the most coachable player on the Raptors roster, and how much of a difference does it make? Man, that's a good question. I'm inclined to say it's Scottie Barnes, right? And there's a couple of reasons for that, but I'll limit it to a big reason, which is just I think he just absorbs things quickly. I think there's a lot of players on this team that are extremely willing to be coached, right? Like Delano Banton, Chris Boucher, Otto Porter. Like almost every single person on this team is like a character guy. Like there aren't, defiant meatheads on this team, right? But I think one thing I've noticed with Scottie and just watching sort of his workouts is just how quickly he picks things up. And I don't know if you wanted to find that as coachable, but I certainly think that that's a huge advantage. We have 3 questions from Kenyon. We'll try to answer all of them. Question 1 is, should the Raptors do some minor asset consolidation this year with Gary Trent Jr., Kem, etc.? And if so, what does that entail? I've been a big proponent of that myself. I really just don't see the value that, like, what is the value of Kem Birch or Malachi Flynn, or what is that package worth? I don't necessarily know. Second question is, can OG improve his offensive athletic fluidity? Yeah, I mean, he's 25 years old, so he is sort of running out of time here, isn't he? I hope so. And the third question is, Otto is a great shooter and can be a secondary playmaker off the bench, but are we still missing a primary ball handler in that second unit? Yeah, we are, but I don't think this is hockey, and we're not really playing lines that way. So I think either Pascal or Fred or Scottie can always just run with that second unit, and that way, you don't have too much of that primary creation in the first unit, and one of them can always be on the court with the second unit. I just think that probably is the way that they should play it out, instead of just, okay, this is Delano Banton's run, I think it would be good to have Scottie running that second unit. Next question is from Rehan Bal. It's, what are your thoughts on the Raptors' projected over-under win total, which currently sits at around 46 wins? I think they'll be over. I think the Raptors should win around 52 games. So I guess that's where I'm at right now. Jonathan asks, which teams have been built in a similar way to the Raptors, and which teams are completely different? Play style, type of star players, etc. Which team has been built like the Raptors? I don't know if there's a team that's necessarily been built like the Raptors. The Warriors, there's like, obviously, like there's no Steph, right? And I will not be one of those people who compares Steph Curry and Fred VanVleet, but a lot of the same principles that the Warriors have applied, right? Switchable, an undersized big, Draymond, at the 5, Kevon Looney, like not playing with a 7-footer other than Andrew Bogut, right? Like, I think a lot of those principles are still in place for the Raptors. The only difference is just offensively, it's a completely different approach, but defensively, at least, I could see that. There's a little bit of the We Believe Warriors, like the Matt Barnes, Baron Davis. Like, it's weird. Every time I think about what the Raptors are doing, I'm reminded there's shades of, Nelly's Warriors and Steve Kerr's Warriors. Ranga asks, for a world-class athlete, OG has some of the worst balance I've ever seen. Amen, ain't that the truth? Every time he drives, I cringe because it's almost always a mess. Do you think there's a workaround for this, or will it ultimately dictate his ceiling along with the subpar ball handling? So I don't actually think his ball handling is subpar per se. I just think that so much of ball handling is confidence and balance. And yeah, so I'm with you. I think that his balance is such an obvious, glaring hole, and I'm very surprised the Raptors have not addressed it. In terms of how to actually address something like this, I think yoga could make him so much more coordinated, opening up his hips. Like, it just feels like there's a sort of like rigidness to how he moves and an imbalance to how his body is structured. And he's just such a big dude. But I agree with you. Like, I think if they could get him to just be a more balanced athlete, like, it would completely, I think it would solve every problem. I think it would solve the ball handling, the scoring, the low post stuff, the falling, but I also think it would probably solve a lot of the injury issues. So I would really like to know why Alex McKechnie and, his team haven't really figured that out yet. Moneybee asks, which teams do you think the Raptors would struggle with this season, and why? What is the Achilles heel of Vision 6-9? Oh, man. I could see them struggling with Philadelphia. Tyrese Maxey and James Harden, it's just a lot to contain. And Joel Embiid just presents so many problems inside for this team. So I think that's one team. I think the Bucks, like a fully healthy Bucks team, could offer, some problems for this team. I think the Atlanta Hawks, with their super dynamic backcourt of DeJounte Murray and Trae Young, could be a really big problem for Gary Trent and and Fred VanVleet. I think just from a talent standpoint, like those are the three teams that just come to mind. I think the Brooklyn Nets could be a really big problem too, with Ben Simmons back. I think a lot of the defensive advantages, like he's geared to stop every single player on the Raptors, right? And just having him back shores up so many issues for that team. But I don't think the Raptors really have a great answer for either Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving. And even if they do have like a decent enough answer for Kevin Durant, I certainly think that a motivated Kyrie Irving could be a really big problem for this team. Just quick, shifty, dynamic, right? So I think those are the teams that come to mind as like I could see some problems matching up with those teams. Okay, Ranga asks, how does Gary Trent Jr. compare to other players of his skill set, Jordan Clarkson, Tyler Hero, etc., with the projected improvement in shooting from Precious and improved shot creation from Scottie? Does Gary Trent Jr. eventually become obsolete if he doesn't embrace being a sixth man, or is he obsolete already in your opinion? If you can support your opinion with stats, that would be great too, but if it's too much work, I understand. Thanks. We all know he's worse coming off the bench as a sixth man, but it's been great while we've experimented with that again. Thoughts? That's an interesting question. So if you'd asked me last year in terms of where do I see him relative to other, let's say, offense-only type guards like Tyler Hero, I would say that he is probably comparable, right? Like, I remember shortly after the Gary Trent for Norman Powell trade that a lot of Raptor fans went, right to the extreme of, oh my God, he's so much better than Norman Powell. And I think if you're really being honest, he's not, right? Offensively, he's not. I think people who say that are just really, really sleeping on how good Norman Powell is offensively, but defensively, he's better. I think in terms of just comparing him to someone like Tyler Hero, I think the biggest difference is creativity. Like Hero, I think it's very difficult to run an offense at all, whether it's, for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whether it's a second unit or a first unit. It's very difficult to feature a guy as a primary option on offense who doesn't make anybody better but himself. And I think that that's something that we haven't really seen from Gary Trent Jr. is an ability. It's not just even an ability or a willingness to pass. It's more like the vision to be able to create advantages. Now, I will say this. I did some statistical analysis last year, and you notice that players shot better on Gary Trent passes than any other player on this team. And I will definitely dig this up at some point if it continues to hold true this year, but I thought that was very interesting, and I thought it had to do with the fact that he was just so reluctant to pass that him passing to anybody usually meant that he was either double teamed or triple teamed, and usually it resulted in these very wide open shots for his teammates. And so it's almost like, okay, well, there's no wonder that his teammates are shooting 45 or 50% on three-pointers off of passes from him. So I thought that was very interesting. So if he can become a more willing passer and just a more creative passer, I think that could just open up the entire world for him as not only as a great fifth option or fourth option in the starting lineup, but also as a featured guy, kind of like Tyler Hero in that sixth man role. I think that would really help. But yeah, I mean, honestly, he's a little bit better than Tyler Hero defensively already. So, and we saw the money that Tyler Hero just got, and they're both kind of similar age. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Gary Trent Jr. is younger. So it's really interesting to see how his market is going to dictate itself. It feels like Tyler Hero has benefited so tremendously from that bubble year and exploding and people thinking that he's so skilled. But I think, functionally they do fulfill a very similar role in their relative offenses. Chad asks, Mailbag, with the new jumbo stat screen and bringing Rico onto the team, you can tell the Raptors are taking development to another level. Would love to see your take on this. Also, the 905 coach and staff, and then focusing on rebounds. Man, good question, Chad. So, look, I love the stats board, like what they have, the jumbo stat screen, and this isn't new for the Raptors, right? Like, this may be a new tool, but the Raptors have always been on the cutting edge of being able to do shot tracking and, providing scientific data on where your shot is missing, how it's missing, all of that stuff. And the Raptors just love data, and they have for the last 8-9 years that under Masai Ujiri, Bobby Webster, that data has always been this huge currency for the Toronto Raptors. So I'm not sure that that's necessarily new. This is just more of a progression in terms of what they've already done. Now, in terms of Rico Hines, I'm a little bit split on this, right? Because I really like Rico and Earl Watson, and I get it, right? But it was something about when Pascal Siakam was asked about this, and when he was asked about the jumbo stat screen, and he seems to have like this idea, and it's almost like presented as like, this is basketball and this is science, right? And it's almost like a distinction being drawn between of like, hey, like we like these guys who are in the gym and they're just like real basketball people, right? And it's almost like defining the other side of it as like these analytic nerds, right? Who've never touched the basketball, who aren't real hoopers, etc. So I think that the Raptors are providing a little bit of both, right? They're not completely fighting one side of it or the other, and they're trying to just bring the best of both worlds, right? Because it's true, like, there's a value of guys like Earl Watson and guys like Rico Hines, right? Like guys who can just get in the gym and do the work with you, but then there's also a huge value to having people who can break down the plays and the angles and the release and the shot tracking data and all the analytics and the lineup metrics. And I think that it's great that the Raptors are embracing both, that they don't have to shun one or the other. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope it does. Peter asks, is there a team that you can remember going through a quote-unquote rebuild so quickly? We lost Leonard, Green, Powell, Lowry, Gasol, Ibaka, and others. There was Tampa where we played all road games, and last year was getting the rebuilt team acquainted, and we were fifth. Although I would agree that we aren't favorites, I think we should win the championship next year, and definitely a couple in the next few years. Wow, I don't know about winning a championship next year or in the next couple of years. It's very hard for me to imagine winning this championship without Scottie Barnes taking, top 10-ish step, right? And I don't know if he's a couple of years away from that or like 4 or 5 years away from being that type of player, but we'll see. But I don't think a team where Pascal Siakam is your first option and or your best player that you're going to win a championship with that team. But to answer your other question of, is there a team that you can remember going through a rebuild so quickly? I don't know if the Raptors went through a rebuild, and I think that's should be a credit to how they built their team, how they didn't quite do what a lot of teams do, which is just completely mortgage the entire future for the now. They didn't really do that. They didn't compromise development either, right? Like, I mean, even in the year that you had Kawhi Leonard and Kyle Lowry and Marc Gasol, and like there was this huge urgency to win, you still saw guys at the end of the bench or younger guys still having a chance to develop. Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, like the same guys today who are effectively your core, those guys were still getting reps in order to grow. So I think that the Raptors have just had a fantastic ability to have their cake and eat it too. So I think that's been great so far. No Frontiers Japan. Honest question. Did you think Precious was the intended centerpiece of the Kyle Lowry trade when it was made? Most people I know assumed Dragic was a decent insurance behind Fred. Everyone today acts like they knew the major move was for Precious, but everyone's tune was quite different before, quote, higher ambitions and Precious's second half growth. Well, New Frontiers Japan, I completely disagree with you. I think it was very obvious from the get-go that Precious was the centerpiece of, what was coming back. And little I guess I thought that was pretty commonly accepted that the Raptors had no interest in actually getting Goran Dragic to the Raptors, that they were immediately looking for a third team to ship him off to. And because that fell through and the Raptors had to bring him to camp and just, prove that he was healthy and or improve their leverage, and then eventually, of course, like they didn't improve their leverage, right? They eventually trade him to get Thaddeus Young, and they have to, add a pick to it or whatever. And but I don't think there's any secret that Precious Achiuwa was the centerpiece coming back. And I think Masai Ujiri did an interview very shortly after that trade, and he said something along the lines of, I called Precious up and I said, "You're mine," right? Like, you're finally mine. So it was obvious that, to me, that Precious Achiuwa was a huge draft target of theirs the year that they drafted Malachi Flynn, that ultimately he went earlier than they would have liked him to, and, they were able to grab him the very next year in a trade. So I think he was definitely the intended trade for them. Ranga asks, the starters are atrocious in the half court. It's been the same problem for 2 years. It's very disappointing. What changes do you think need to be made to the offense? Interesting, right? Because, look, it's a very limited sample size. But last year in the playoffs, right, I don't think that our half-court offense was nearly as terrible as people would like to think it was. Now, granted, it's just one series, it's only 6 games, etc., but I don't think that was necessarily the hugest problem. I think that there's a lack of spacing and a lack of, cohesion in that starting lineup. I think the role optimization could be a lot better, right? I think Fred, and specifically Fred, Gary, and Pascal Siakam, they don't move the ball nearly as fast, and sometimes advantages sort of disappear. But yeah, I would like to. I think this has always been a bit of an experiment to put those 5 players together, right? And I don't know if necessarily like they're always helping each other and or kind of getting in each other's way, right? Like Pascal and Scottie, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they sort of like to operate in the same parts. And it's like, I don't think either one of those guys provides any real spacing the way that Otto Porter does, the way that Gabe Brown does, right? The way that Fred VanVleet does. And so it's almost like, because they're always kind of occupying that mid-post area, they're always kind of like screwing up the offense to some extent, either by asking for the ball in the mid-post and or, driving into those areas on the court. And I think that it just sometimes results in some very inefficient spacing. So I know that it's, very difficult for anyone to imagine a situation where you're going to either not play your best player or your second best player together, right? But I just think that it's just an awkward fit, right? Like, if in an ideal world, if I were building a team around a Scottie Barnes, I don't think Pascal Siakam would be on that team personally. So I think there's a bit of an inefficiency there. And I think that you can probably notice last year, before Pascal Siakam came back, that there was at least I felt like there was a little bit more fluidity to the offense with just Scottie operating those parts of the court. And, you had Gary and OG sort of fanning out to the corners. I thought that made a little bit more sense offensively. But of course, later on in the year, we saw plenty of moments where, the Raptors had some good moments on the court with Scottie and Pascal, but I just don't think that they're a great fit in the half court, personally. Sneaky G's says, Pascal ISOs, what do you think can be done to give the team another outlet? This is our fallback for a bucket or as shot clock winds down. Great if he takes another step, but he can't do it alone. Sixers playoff series demonstrated how shutting down our limited shooting can cripple the offense. I don't necessarily think that it did, and the Raptors were surprisingly efficient in terms of isolation offense last year, and Pascal Siakam was like shockingly efficient as an isolation scorer. And I think the Raptors, if I'm not mistaken, someone correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think the Raptors had the second most efficient offense out of ISOs in the playoffs last year. So anyway, this has been fun. I apologize if this is a little bit dry. I have been a little bit sick and a little bit under the weather, and hopefully I'm feeling a little bit better. I did try to do this video with herbal tea earlier, and I gotta be honest, it just doesn't work. You gotta do it with the coffee. So, let me know in the comments below if you have any thoughts about the preseason, and or who do you think is going to make the final roster spot. Do you think it should be Justin Champagnie? Let me know about that. I think Delano Benton has just been awesome so far, so let me know if you have any expectations for him taking like a permanent step up, or do you think this is just more like something that's happening in preseason right now because he's warmed up from Team Canada and that it's just going to go away. And let me know about that, and let me know if you are worried about Scottie Barnes in the comments below. You know, do you think he's going to take that next step forward? Are you with me, or are you kind of with these well-intentioned Raptor skeptics who are, you know, taking every chance possible to let everyone know to temper their expectations? So let me know about that. All right, talk to you later. See you next time. Bye.